Welcome to Brick by Brick, Building Wealth Through Homeownership. I am Kim Von Dohren, your Realtor.
And I'm your banker, Ed Marko.
So we're back. And today we're going to talk about probably everybody's favorite topic, flipping a house.
Yay.
Yay. Now, you have done flips.
Yes.
I have done flip and hold. I'm not a flipper. I don't buy, rehab, and sell. I buy, rehab, and hold. So you're more experienced with regard to the buy, flip, and sell.
Right.
And so we're going to talk in depth about this topic, and it may or may not take us more than one podcast to get through all the information because it's a lot. However, we're going to do our best to be concise and yet complete.
Yes.
So, would you like to get us started?
Yeah. So the first thing that I want to start out with a big yellow caution. Okay. You really need to get educated about how to do some things yourself if you're going to flip houses. I know people watch HGTV and you see these people bringing in their contractors to do all of this. And if you're flipping a multi-million-dollar property, you can probably have that kind of a margin. But most people in small towns and little cities that are flipping houses don't have that kind of margin. So you really need to learn how to install, plank flooring, how to prep for installing plank flooring, how to do light electrical work like changing a ceiling fan or lighting fixtures, switch plugs, plates, how to change out washer and dryer hookups, how to do venting for a dryer, how to do paint prep properly. If you prep properly when you're painting, it goes very smooth. If you don't, you're going to have what I call a bad day. You don't want to have a bad day because that's wasting time. You want to learn how to do some light plumbing. You want to learn how to fix a mishung door. It's kind of an art to that. And if you can learn how to do it, it just presents a lot better if all the doors and windows are straight. How to remove trim work and refinish it, paint it, how to paint it, how to properly measure trim work, how to properly measure square feet for a floor, how to determine how big a roof is from the ground, just looking at the size of the house. So you can get a good estimate on materials for if you're going to need to put a roof on something. All these kind of things you need to learn about. Again, back to HGTV, it's fun to watch, but it's not an education. If anything, it's inspirational. Kind of like watching HGTV is kind of like watching ER or Grey's Anatomy and thinking that qualifies you to do brain surgery. It just doesn't.
Right.
You need to get the skill sets that you need to have to do as much of this stuff on your own as you possibly can. Get educated. You can go to, my favorite is YouTube. When everybody else was watching, what was
Cat
that?
videos?
Cat videos, but what was that show on HBO with the dragons? What was that called?
It just went out of my head.
Oh well, when people were watching these kind of shows,
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones,
There
yes.
it
When
is.
people were watching Game of Thrones, my wife and I were watching hours and hours of home improvement how-to videos on YouTube. And then same thing, I don't know what anybody's work schedule is, but if you have Saturday mornings, it's not an advertisement, it's just a statement. Lowe's, Home Depot, Ace, a bunch of other hardware stores offer free classes. I was at Lowe's this week on Monday, and they were signing people up for a Saturday class on how to build retaining walls.
Yeah, that's
There's
wow.
always something going on.
That's not basic rehabbing.
Well,
Doing a retaining wall.
I'm sure it's a 3-foot retaining wall, not a 40-foot retaining wall, but for landscaping, you just want to know how to do that kind of stuff properly. So take the time to know what you're doing before you try to do it. It's scary enough out there.
Did you do that? Did you learn how to do it before you started flipping, or how did you educate yourself?
So my dad was a do-it-yourselfer, so I learned a lot of stuff when I was a kid, how to do light plumbing. I was never afraid of electricity. I have a brother-in-law who's very good at tile work. So if you have family members or friends that are willing to help you or teach you or point you in the right direction. That's another. Use your assets. Just use every asset that you have at your beck and call. And I've made mistakes. And I know what I don't know. Like, as an example, we bought a property. It was in town. It was a 2-story townhouse, middle of the row. It had a leaky roof. That was apparent when we bought it. We knew that was coming. I actually scheduled like $8,000 in my head to replace the roof. It came in at less than $5,000 because it's what's called a rolled roof. So it's just,
Woohoo!
yeah, right? Yeah, victory. And the roof was only like 700 square feet because it's a townhouse and it's just going straight up into the air. No, nothing fancy there. So they go up there with a bunch of tar and some, 1/8 inch thick rubber and glue a roof back on top of the existing roof. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but that's the way that they did it. And it worked. It worked fine. It still works to this day. I'm actually still familiar with
So
that
that's a
house.
positive outcome.
Hmm.
Have you had a negative outcome from something you didn't know what you were doing?
So back to roofing. We bought a house, again, a townhouse, and it had what's one of those round, kind of pointy, stick out windows with the fancy little roof on it. And that had a leak. And I thought, we'll call the same roofer and we'll get this fixed and that'll be fine. Oh, and they opened it up. I won't do roofing. That's the one thing I don't know about roofing. I don't pretend I know about roofing. I just know roofers. And when they opened it up, there was all kind of rotten wood underneath there, and it ended up poking a hole that went right through into the living room from the outside. It was just a big mess. So we ended up spending, $3,000 or $4,000 extra on that project. When we get into the math, I'm going to tell you how you can try to build in for that as much as possible, and then probably wrap it up with what's the long-term solution for things like that. But yeah, you need to be psychologically prepared to have some fails.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And as someone who has to do a rehab, whether it's to flip the house, which there are elements that are different, which is why we're making the distinction and doing
Mhm.
it in 2 separate podcasts. There are different things that you do and how you do them, and that's why a flip is different than a hold.
Right.
But I still am doing a rehab, which means I still am confronted with all of the same problems that you are as a flipper,
Correct.
which is the roof leaking? Does the electric work? Is there a clog in the plumbing,
Right.
etc.? And I would say also that you may not know what you're doing, and you will encounter something.
Oh,
For
yeah.
certain, you will encounter something that you don't know how to solve, and you will have no choice but to ask somebody.
Yeah.
And so determining who your resources, you refer to them as assets, determining who your resources are going into the project is super important, because you will have to call on somebody at some point in time, more than likely. If you don't, bravo, but make sure you've done a calculation in your mind of, okay, who's good at these things,
Right.
so that you can get some help if you need it. And educating yourself is sometimes it's life experience, but there's going to be people watching this podcast who don't have a stepdad who taught them anything handy. And so then where do you learn that? You are going to have to start to, if you've bought your first house, which is what we've encouraged people to do,
Mhm.
right? Is in order to start being an investor, buy your own house first. You get to experiment on your own house.
Oh, yeah. 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 Owning a home is the best way to learn about owning a home
Mhm.
and fixing a home.
Yes.
It is kind of, life is a learn on the fly game.
It
This
is.
is something that you play,
Yeah.
you learn while you're playing it.
Yes.
But we do live in a great time where you've got just absolutely wonderful information on YouTube and the internet in general. Just don't watch one video about how to replace a toilet and think that you know how to replace a toilet. Watch several of them
Yes.
from different people, because
Yeah.
they're all different. But on that note, replacing a toilet sounds scary. It's incredibly simple.
Yes.
It is so simple, it's laughable.
Yeah.
And when you find out that it cost you $300 to replace the toilet plus the cost of the toilet, and you can do this in less than an hour with virtually no tools, and for the sake of the toilet and maybe $20 in parts, you just want to kill a plumber.
You're right, though. The internet is the magnificent resource that is out there to help you in that moment, because there is literally a video on everything how
Right.
to.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, one great example. So I'm pretty good at plumbing. I'm just, my dad bought leaky houses and I learned about plumbing, fixing leaky house. But we had bought a house and there was almost no hot water pressure at the sink. Couldn't figure out what was wrong. Crawled underneath there. The hot water valve that was under there was very old and in bad shape. I figured if I can just get this thing open, I'll be okay.
Uh-oh.
And so I put a wrench on it and I turned it and it snapped off.
Mm-hmm.
And
I knew that story was coming.
water was gushing everywhere. I had to run into the basement, turn off the water. And at that point, I'm just like, I can't even think of, I'm just going to call a plumber and let him fix it. I probably could have took the whole thing apart and done it myself, but now it's time versus money.
Yes.
If I'm going to spend 3 or 4 hours fixing something that I'm not really that good at fixing, replacing piping, I can fix a leak. I'm not good at replacing piping and especially valves.
Mm-hmm.
So I called the plumber. He got it done in an hour. I paid him his $250. In the meantime, I was in upstairs putting flooring down, which I'm good at.
Right.
So you want to.
Yes.
You've heard me say this in multiple times. Know what you don't know.
So important.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with you. There are things that you have to, some things you try, some things you fail, and it's okay. You can try again, or you can do what you did, and that's call somebody and have them come help you. But I knew when you started that story, because that's like just one of the things that happens. When I see an old valve, that thing's snapping off when you go to turn it. So just know that going in. If there's an old valve and you go to turn it, it's more than likely snapping.
Be prepared.
Yes.
Be prepared.
Yeah.
So anyway, that all said, let's say we did all that. We're doing our homework. We want to get out there and start looking for properties. So when you're looking for properties, you're looking for opportunities. You are not looking for a house for you to move into or that you're going to keep. So you don't have to love the neighborhood. It just has to be an okay neighborhood. You don't have to love the style of the house. None of that stuff matters. You're just looking for an opportunity, a chance for success. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah, there are some things, though, I would, as a realtor and even as an investor, say is, if you can get a house that's on a street that's close to a church or a school,
Schools are great.
Yes, those are much more palatable to your future buyer, which is ultimately where you're headed in this story. Is there's going to be a buyer at the end of this story. And so those things do make it more desirable. So
right. Well,
but not like you're living there.
Well, but you're absolutely correct, Kim. So you're looking. You want to look at the house through your to be soon client's eyes. So what is marketable? Well, there's some things that are just there's rules to it. Okay. If you're going to flip a house, don't buy a one bedroom. It's just a terrible idea. There's great buys on one bedrooms, and there's a reason for that, and that's because nobody wants to buy them.
That's right. Your buyer pool is tiny.
A two bedroom in the right neighborhood, maybe, but what you're really looking for is a three bedroom house with 1.5 to 2 baths, if possible. I prefer townhouses because first time home buyers look to live in town. It's a younger people usually that are looking at these houses. They want to be close to schools. They want to be close to entertainment. They want to be close to things. This is just my opinion, by the way, on that side of it, but not my opinion. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 to 2 baths. That's what you're looking for.
Correct.
Almost all of the time. And somewhere between 1,000 and 1,400 square feet, unless you want to start flipping $350,000 and $400,000 houses, but that's not what I'm talking about.
This is kind of that's the box. That what you just described is that's what most people are looking to buy.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So where are you going to look for these houses? So there's the typical thing is to go on the internet, and you can certainly do that. Go on any one of these search engines. They're everywhere. There's a couple of really big ones out there. I'm not going to name them by name, but they rhyme with pillow or Realtor.com, and they're great. You can go in there and you can select how many bedrooms and all this kind of stuff that you're looking for. And then what we would do when we would do that is we would search by lowest to highest price because you're looking for a bargain. You're looking for a bargain. You're not looking for something that's expensive. We would look at time on the market. If a house has been on the market for 2 days, probably it's going to be gone before you get to it. But you see something that's out there that's in the price range you're looking, for what I'm going to talk about today, it's going to be around $100,000 to $120,000. Something that's been on the market for 30, 40, 50, 60 days. And you're going to want to go look at those properties. When you get there, you're going to be looking for tragic flaws. But we'll get into that in a minute. But that's one way to search for houses. Another way is to go to the courthouse and get a list of people who are behind on their taxes. If people are behind on their taxes, they're having a financial difficulty, they're elderly, they're getting a divorce, whatever the reason is, they're behind on their taxes. And if they're behind on their taxes a few months, you want to get to that person before they end up in court. You want to come in there and try to be an angel for these people. You're going to be able to bail them out, hopefully, of a bad situation. Most people, when they're behind on their taxes, their house is suffering as well. So it's not just that they're behind on their taxes. There's other things. So you still got to look at that house and see if you want to buy it. But
you don't have competitors.
Right, yes,
because
right,
everybody's a flipper now.
right. Oh my
Everybody
gosh.
and their brother and
Yep.
their uncle and their cousin and their aunt and their sister. Everybody is a flipper.
Right.
And so it is way more competitive than it was 10 years ago.
Oh yeah.
So if you can find ways to get access to properties that you didn't have to compete against another investor, especially if you're new and you're just starting out and these other people have resources you don't have, you want an advantage. This is one of the ways to get that advantage. And if you have the nerve to knock on doors, which is what you're suggesting.
Right.
You didn't say that part, but that's what you're saying.
Well, that's what we're going to get to that. Yeah.
You're going to have to knock on that person's door and say.
Yeah. The other thing that I recommend that you do that nobody wants to do anymore is just get in your car and go to a neighborhood where you would like to have flip a house and drive around, and you're looking for a house that looks like it's in need of repair. Probably the lawn isn't mowed the way it's supposed to be, or it's done haphazardly. There's not a lot of motion. There's not kids playing in the yard or anything like that. That's another house that's something is going on there, most likely. I could be dead wrong. Maybe they're just don't care about their lawn and don't care about their house. But most of the time, when you see that property, it's that way for a reason. And that's when the knocking on the door thing comes into play. You don't be rude. You don't be presumptive. You just knock on the door and say, hey, couldn't help but notice. Is everything okay? Would you think about selling this house if the opportunity arose? And they're either going to tell you to get the hell off their porch, or they're going to look at you and say, what do you mean? What do you have in mind? And then you better have something in mind. So you're going to want to, before you actually knock on that door, you're going to want to do a little homework, figure out, a ballpark and say, look, I haven't looked at the house or anything like that. I was just checking to see if you were interested. Do you owe anything on the house? And they're going to tell you what they owe on the house. I found out you were behind on your taxes. Are you running out of money? Is that the problem? They're going to tell you what their problem is. And then you're going to say, you know what? I might be able to help you. How about if I stop back? And then you set an appointment to stop back with a plan for them. Because you got to go home and think about this. You got to do all the math and figure out what's what. Ask them to invite you in, to take a look around the house. Go in the basement, go in the attic. You got to look in all these places before you spin this offer. But you want to get an opportunity to look at it, see if there's an opportunity there for you. It's all well and good to help someone. You want to help someone, but not at your own detriment. You want to make sure that this is good for you and good for them. That's the whole idea behind this. At any rate, those are the ways that I know of to successfully find homes in a price range where they're flippable and in a situation where you can get in there with what they call good bones and look for the demons on your own.
And I would say you'll get good at that. You start to see, you'll know the properties where there's either a financial problem, there's an elderly person, there's something. You'll start to see those properties and you'll know which ones they are. And to knock on the door is bold. You do have to find some courage to do that.
Yep.
And you could, you may get turned down. But like I said, it's the place where you are going to have an advantage over competing against other investors. If you at least want to take the chance, it's a great way to start.
Yeah, we had not some people call them business cards. They weren't business cards. They're called calling cards. So it doesn't have the name of your business or anything like that on it. It's about half the size of a business card, but it's on hard card stock. You can order them online. It's called a calling card. And on the front of it, it has your name and phone number. And if somebody was, no, we're not interested in selling it. Okay, well, here, take my information. You just hand it to them. If you change your mind, call me, and you walk away. It doesn't have your address on it. Doesn't they? Don't, all they know is this is your name and this is your phone number. Nothing else on there.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
It's called a calling card.
Mhm.
These were very popular in the 16, 17, and 1800s, and I love them. It's just your name and phone number. They didn't use a phone number back then.
I
They
was
used
just
an
gonna say,
address.
well, that would have been
Yes,
interesting.
yes. They would call on someone and they
Yeah.
would leave. Ed Marko from Anytown was here looking for
Mhm.
you, sir. And then he would come out and say, yes, Ed Marko from Anytown. What can I do for you? But you would give the butler or whoever answered the door your calling card so they knew who you were.
Yes.
So yeah, before phone numbers, it was addresses, but I love them.
I just want to point out that you mentioned about going to the tax
Mhm.
to the courthouse and
Yeah.
looking up tax records. At the end of the day, that's the same result. You got to go knock on that person's door.
Yeah, it's
You
the
might
same
be able to
thing, yeah.
call them,
Mhm.
but you also might have to
I
knock.
never called people.
You always
I
knock on
always knock on the door. That's me. I find it more personal, particularly when you're dealing with people that are most of these people are in distress
Mhm.
of some sort.
Right.
And they don't want to answer the phone because it's never good news on the phone. So when they do answer the phone, they're hostile. Immediately, what do
Right.
you want? What are you trying to scam me out of?
Right.
What's going on? Who are you? Why are you? But if you show up and they look at you and you're there and they can see, you know, I used to say to people, they want to poke you in the forehead. They want to know you're real.
Mhm.
Let them poke you in the forehead and know you're real. I'm here to help you.
Yes.
You know, I can be of assistance. You know, and again, you got to be prepared to walk away.
Mhm.
It's a difficult thing to do, but it is a worthwhile thing to do. None of this is easy. Again, it's not HGTV. They don't show you that.
No.
They don't show you that on there. They
Yeah.
just find the house and
Yeah.
oh look, magic house.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
we're-
Yeah, they're skipping a lot of the hard parts.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, for sure.
Yes.
So before you put that offer to these people, though, you've got to figure out what is this house worth,
Mhm.
right? For real, in the real
Yes.
world, what's it worth?
Yes.
So you've got to do a thing realtors do, which is called find comps.
Yes. Yes. So you would and I don't want to skip ahead here. You do have to find comps, which is short for the word comparable.
Right.
We throw that around like everybody knows what it means. And a lot of people have learned what it means, but I still encounter people who don't. A comparable is a house that is comparable to the house you are considering, which basically means that it is. Do you want to go over what it is?
Yeah. So a comparable house, uh, the first thing you want to do is you want to try to find houses similar to that house in the same neighborhood, absolutely in the same school district.
Mhm.
Really difficult to find them in the same neighborhood sometimes, but it's really got to be in the same school district. And that's for taxation and things like that. You need it to be similar. The next thing you want to be really careful about is the size. How many square feet is the house you're buying compared to the houses that you're looking at that sold recently. You want to make sure it's the same number of bedrooms, the same number of baths. There's mathematical equations you can do if it's slightly different, and you can go online and learn how to do that actually. Does the property have on-street or off-street parking or a garage? You could have virtually the same townhouse on the same block, and the one with off-street parking and a garage is worth 20% more than the rest of them. If you ever lived in the city, you know the value of off-street parking and even more so a garage. It's a big deal.
Amen.
Lastly, you want to try to look at houses that were built in the same era, and by that I mean the same years. Construction on housing changed remarkably over the last 125 years. From 1900 to say 1920 was one method for building houses, and from 21 to right after World War II, they built houses a different way. And you can actually see this when you watch old time movies. You see the difference in the way the houses look almost immediately. You can watch Happy Days, and by the house, by the neighborhood, it's the 50s,
Right.
because all those houses were built in the 50s. Then you get to from 1960 to about 1978. In 1978, we have a hard stop there. What changed in 1978?
They got rid of lead-based paint.
Correct. And that changed everything. That was a big deal on the way that they started dealing with paints and the structure of the house. It actually changed a lot of stuff because lead-based paint, it hung around a lot longer. It was great. It just killed people. Uh, so then from 1979 to 2000 was another, and then from 2002 to the present, you've got all these different styles of houses. So if you're looking at a Victorian home that was built in 1919, that's 4,000 square feet, it's going to have a remarkably different value than a 4,000 square foot, what they call a McMansion, that was built 4 years ago.
Right.
They're completely different animals.
And don't start as a new flipper. Do not start with either one of those properties.
Right. Yeah. You want to keep it simple. Yeah. So that's what you're looking for when you're looking for comps. And what you're trying to determine is, what is the value of this property going to be when I'm finished with it?
Yes. Now, can we just touch on a few things?
Absolutely.
So basically, the way in which I would kind of reiterate what you said is, number one, and this is the way we look up to value a home when we go to list it as a realtor, we follow the steps that a appraiser is going to follow. And so I'm going to start small. I'm going to start within the neighborhood, like you said. So I'm going to start in the township, work my way up to the school district. I'm going to use the age of the home and try to stay within 20 years of the age of the home. I'm going to then look at the style of the home. Okay. Is it because a bi-level is not the same as a ranch? They are not valued the same. They are not as marketable in the same ways. I'm also going to look at, I drew a blank. Acreage was the other piece.
Oh, yeah. How much land is there?
So what's the size of the property? Those things are all very important when you are determining what you're about to talk about, which we refer to as the ARV, or the after rehabbed value.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So the other piece that we didn't mention at all is, what are the conditions of these homes that are our comparables? Do they have new kitchens, or is it the original kitchen?
Right.
Right. So you do have to also take into consideration, what is the condition of your comparables?
Right. Yeah. Super important that you get good at that. You can go on these websites and you can look at all this information, learn about the neighborhood that you're going to be in, so you understand what's out there. So you have kind of a running knowledge of what's going on around you when you're there.
The other piece would be, if it's your intention to sell the property and not hold it, and more than likely you used a realtor to purchase it, your realtor will help you get your comps.
Correct.
They
yes.
will be one of your resources for helping you determine your ARV, or after rehabbed value.
Right.
And then that's one piece of work you shouldn't have to spend too much time on.
On that note, the dozens of homes that we bought over the years, I never, ever bought a home without a realtor. It just never happened. This is what I do for a living. But again, I'm going to go back to, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So you need to have a professional there, in my opinion, to help you through this process. I know realtors that buy rental properties and flip properties, and they'll use another realtor rather than rely on their own wisdom, just to have that other set of eyes over there. And it sounds like, oh, I'm paying this person, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, you are, and that's worth it. You know what? You don't go to court without a lawyer,
Right.
And the person that does go to court without a lawyer is a fool. You just don't do it. I can't stress that enough.
And I know this isn't a push for me. I just understand that the value that we offer is probably misunderstood.
Yeah.
Or just not, people aren't aware. And when this is what you do, like, one of the things I think that frustrates me as a realtor at times is, it's what I do all day, every day, right? So I couldn't imagine coming to the bank tomorrow, Ed, and saying that I can do your job. I think most people think they can do my job, but they don't do it every day, and they don't have the experience and the knowledge that I have from having done it for 11 years. I don't know how to be a lender. I could come in there and might get a few things right,
Hmm.
but there's a bunch of things I wouldn't know that I don't know.
Right.
So that's why you really would benefit from using a realtor.
Right. And back to that whole, Grey's Anatomy ER analogy.
Yes.
I've never seen a doctor operate on themselves.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
You're right. So
Yes. And
same thing here.
you just calculate it into your math. That's just part of your
It is
costs.
part of the cost. Yep.
Just like paying for the interest on your loan. It's just part of the cost.
Yep. And on the buying side, there's virtually no cost there. It's very, very low. Huh?
Hopefully now.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, very, very little
that-
cost. It's not the same as when you're selling, but
Right.
when you're selling, we build it in there. But
Mhm.
so maybe let's say that we found a house, we identified a house, we did all of our due diligence, we realized that house fixed is going to be worth about $150,000. It's a middle of the row townhouse in a small city on the East Coast, and it's worth $150,000 if everything is bright and shiny, but it's a mess. Grandma's been living in it. She hasn't upgraded anything in 40 years, and she needs out. She can't afford the taxes anymore. You go up to grandma and you say, we're going to help you out here. I can give you $100,000 for this house, and I can give it to you in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever. We've already talked about how we're going to arrange
Right.
financing, so we've got all that figured out. Will that help you? Oh my God, what a blessing. I can move in with my daughter in Florida. When can we close? So let's say that all happened, and we're going to take a big breath, and we'll come back for part 2 in a little bit.
Woohoo!
You have been listening to Brick by Brick. Be sure and subscribe, post questions for future episodes, or comment. This is a Super Squirrel production, Super Squirrel Studios, Stony Creek Mills, Pennsylvania.